Hello and welcome back to this course of videos on Node.js and Express. Now in this video we'll be continuing to discuss making a post request using AJAX and following the concept of a SPA, single page application. Now in the last video we showed you diagrammatically how this would work. In this video we're going to show you in code. So this is our home page here. Now you'll notice in the one thing that's changed on this home page is this has been added here, a text box and a button. Now this is going to allow us to submit our data to our Node server. Now previously we actually appended to the URL. We used the / and then we added our route parameter, which was our username, and then we also added our question mark and we added our query string, which submitted the first name and last name. Now instead of doing that, this time we are going to submit just the username and use AJAX to submit it rather than on the URL, and then on the server we are then going to accept that username and then transmit back the username and the first name and last name. So given that we are transmitting the data via AJAX rather than using the URL, the first thing we're going to look at is the JavaScript that is going to transmit the AJAX call. So if I switch over to my main.js file, which is in my public folder under JS here, main.js. Now you'll notice, so what I've done is I've added an event listener. Now I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on this because this is client side and what we're learning is Node on the server. However, I just wanted to demonstrate the fact that when this button is clicked, when that button is clicked, we're going to prevent the default, prevent the default behavior of a button, which would be a page refresh, and instead we are going to run our AJAX command using jQuery. And what you can see is I'm specifying the type is going to be post, the URL is just going to be /, so just the we're just requesting the / the route, the route. And the content type here is very important. I'm specifying that the content type is JSON. And then this is the data that I want to pass. Now what I'm passing is a JavaScript object where the key is username and the value is a variable which is pulling from in this box here. So, but you'll notice another thing. I'm not just passing this JavaScript object. I have to run a method called json.stringify and then pass the JavaScript object to the stringify method. Now what that does is it takes a regular JavaScript object, which this is, and turns it into a JSON object, basically just by putting quotations around the both the key and the value. My value actually already has quotations around it because it's a string, but JSON, both the key and the value have to be surrounded by quotations. So this is what my stringify method is doing, and so this AJAX is going to send our post request to our Node server when we and it's going to submit on the route, if you like. So let's now switch over to our server. How is our server going to interpret this? So our server, first of all, there's a few changes we had to make from when we were processing our index.ejs file 2 videos ago. So we're still requiring Express, obviously. Now this is new. Now this is actually something, body parser is a new module that we're requiring. Now what body parser allows us to do is to basically read the body of the post request. Now, a second line we had to add to to basically use body parser is this app.use. Now app.use, this is something that app.use is something that I'm introducing for the first time, and it's a way to use middleware in Node. Now middleware is something we'll talk about more later, but for the moment I'm just going to very top line mention that app.use will allow you to use your middleware module on any route. That is what app.use does. Allows you to use this on any route. And what it would do, what middleware does, is it gets in between the response, the request and the response. Now, body parser can be used to parse different types of payload, if you like, different types of data. Now, if you remember, again, our content type that we're sending in the body is JSON. So, because it's JSON, we are going to specify that we want to use body parser.json. I mean, as I mentioned in the previous video, we could have also sent our data as, it's basically key value pairs. It's called URL encoded, but it's a different way of sending the data, sending the payload. And you would use a different method on the body parser module if you wanted to parse the URL encoded way of submitting data in the body of the post request. We're using JSON, so this is how we're engaging body parser, with the JSON method. So now so these three, the GET requests are the same as they were before. Now the big difference here is our post request. Now, so instead of using app.get as we did before, we've now changed it to app.post. We're reacting to a post on the root URL. As you noticed, that's what we're transmitting. We're transmitting a post on the root /URL. So this is what we are looking for. I'm also going to, in case the user does /index.html, this will also run. So / or /index.html. The user can submit either of those URLs when they're posting. So all we're going to do for the moment, ignore this, what's commented out here. This is what's going to come later. For the moment, all we're going to do is we're going to take, run this method on, actually it's not a method, it's a property. It's a property of the request object, which is body. So I'm going to console log that out. So we're actually going to be able to see what the data that was passed here. We're going to log it out on our server. Now, I'm responding back to the browser with basically an empty string. That's just because we will look in the developer tools in a sec, and I want to be able to see all of the headers. It won't show me all of the headers unless I actually respond to the request. And then once I've responded, the request is completed, so we can see all of the headers in the dev tools. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to. Now, just a quick note on this, the send method on the response object, this is actually doing the same thing. This send method is doing the same thing as, remember in previous videos where we looked at creating a read stream and a write stream and piping data to the browser, so doing it in the most efficient way through streaming. Now, we're obviously not actually reading anything here, but this is actually this is causing a write stream. Although there's no benefit because all I'm sending is an empty string, it's just important to note that this is send is basically simplifying the fact of the effort of creating a write stream. And then remember, we wrote chunks to the write stream and then we ended the write stream. This is all done for you in Express just through res.send. So I'm going to go back to my browser here, and it doesn't matter what we put in the username here. I'm just going to put, I will put James1, but it doesn't actually matter. All we're looking for is, all we're going to do is console.log what was submitted. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my DevTools so we can see actually what happens when we run this request. So I'm going to submit this, Now you can see this is the actual request that we've just made, the post request that we just made. If I drill into this now, we'll see that, yes, the request URL we made was just a localhost /. That was basically what we did here. We can see it's a post request. As we requested, it's a post request. It's come back with a 200 OK. Let's just look at the request headers here. We can see that the content type is application.json here. Again, exactly what we requested. Now, if we go back to the bottom, you can see here's the payload. Here's what we actually submitted. We submitted the username and the username text, which was username text was James1, and we stringified it. It's actually been so we can see it here. This is the JavaScript object that was transmitted as the payload, the JSON object. So now let's take a look at the server side. If you recall, on the server side, when responding to our AJAX post request, we console.logged request.body. So this is a body property on the request object. And if you look at our console, what we actually logged was this JavaScript object username and the username that was inputted by the user. And if we go back to our JavaScript code, we can see this is exactly the object that we transmitted with our AJAX post request. So now we've seen that work, what we want to do now is actually send back a real response. Right up until now, we've just been streaming back this empty string through the res.send method. So I'm going to delete that and I'm going to replace it with this code below. Now what this code is doing is actually mimicking a database request. Now in real world, when a user submits their username in this manner, what would normally happen is the server would then reach out and ping a database and use the username submitted by the user for the database request and then bring back the user's data. So that's what we are replicating here. There's my request.body again, which we saw here. We can sort of key value pair, username and James1. So I'm going to use the username property within that body object, and I'm going to say if it comes back as James1, which we know it will, then I am going to populate this JavaScript object with these three properties, username, first name and last name, as if I'd pulled them from a database. And then I'm actually going to send that back. So I'm going to use res.send again, but instead of just sending an empty string, I'm going to be streaming this JavaScript object. And we are using this JSON.stringify, as you saw before, to actually turn this JavaScript object into a JSON object so it can be transmitted across the wire to the browser. So now once we've sent this data back, we have to go back to our browser code to look at how we're going to react to that. So I'm just going to save this. I go back to my main.js and we have an extra property here within this object that we're passing to the AJAX call, and this is the success property. Now the success property is the key. The value is basically what action we're going to take when our browser receives back this data. So this data is what is actually sent by the server. So what is being sent here, this JavaScript object, is going to be received in here, and then we can pass that as a parameter into our object here. I'm just going to comment this code here. We'll run that after. We'll update the page after. For now, all I want to do is I want to console.log the data that comes that is transmitted to us, which is the JSON data. If you remember, we stringified our data, so what we're going to receive is the stringified data. I'm going to console.log that, and then we're also going to console.log the JSON object once it's been run through this parse method. and then you'll actually see it as once again back in its original state as a JavaScript object. So let's go back to here. I'm going to open my DevTools, and then I am going to run our AJAX post request. Now you can see here, here's our two console logs. First of all, we have the JSON object that came through here. This is the raw JSON response that was sent down the wire. And then the second console log here is actually a native JavaScript object. So that's after the raw JSON response has been passed using the JSON.parse method to put it back into its native JavaScript format, so we can then use it on the browser. So let's go ahead and use it on the browser. I'm going to uncomment this method here called update page. This is a function that I created, and then uncomment the actual function body itself. So what we're actually doing here is update page is being passed that JavaScript object that we just looked at after the parse method. This is a JavaScript object we're passing through to here, and then we're using it to actually update our browser, to update our page. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually getting 3 spans here. So these 3 spans are actually I'll show you the code in a second, but one of them resides here and 2 of the spans reside here. And then what we're doing is we are using the properties of the JavaScript object, which is inside data, to populate these 3 spans using inner HTML. So to look at where this data is being populated, let's take a look at our index.html versus our index.ejs. Now you can see on EJS we used these placeholders. So on the server side we used these EJS placeholders, but on the browser side we are using these spans that we just referred to. So you can see the difference, very simple difference in what we're using. Server side dynamically created page, client side dynamically created page. And the same thing applies to the username here. You can see we're using a span here to dynamically populate our username. With the index.js, we use this EJS placeholder. So now we have all of our code ready to populate our page to our user. So if I just save everything, and then I go back to my browser and I refresh, I'm just going to put in my username here and then run my AJAX request, and you should see the 2 spans here being populated with first name and last name, and the username here being populated with username, and it has. So this is updated and this is updated. So again, to refresh, what we just did is we did an AJAX request. We passed our username here. On the server, we then faked a database request and then responded with some JSON, which was our username and our first name and our last name. And then we dynamically updated the page on the client without a full page refresh, remember, because we want this to be a single page application SPA. So we did that instead of what we did previously, which is where we dynamically created the page on the server using AJS and then sent it back. So I hope this gives you a thorough understanding of post requests and AJAX and a good introduction to what SPA frameworks are, and I hope to see you in the next lesson.